On the 24th of May, 1819, a little princess was born at Kensington Palace in London. Her name was Alexandrina Victoria. She was the daughter of the Duke of Kent, King William's brother, and a German princess, Victoria of Saxe-Coburg. Victoria's father died when she was a baby. Her childhood was lonely and dull. She had no friends to play with. Her favourite toys were dolls. She rarely went out because her mother was very protective. She grew up with her mother and her strict German governess, Baroness Lehzen. Victoria adored Baroness Lehzen. Victoria later wrote that she had no brothers or sisters to live with, never had a father, and did not know what a happy home life was. The young princess loved animals and had 3 pets: a dog called Dash, a canary, and a parakeet. She had private lessons in many subjects from 9:30 in the morning to 6 in the evening. She loved singing and dancing. At the age of 12, Victoria said, "I see I am nearer the throne than I supposed." On that day she made a promise. "I will be good." When Victoria was 13, her mother decided that she must see Britain and that the British people must see her. The young princess travelled to Wales, the Midlands, Yorkshire and the South Coast. She was welcomed with enthusiasm everywhere. These journeys were not a holiday, but a part of her education. Victoria wrote about her journey in her diary. She did not know that thousands of poor children worked in factories and mills in terrible conditions. They never went to school and often died at a young age. She also learned that working people lived in small, dark houses and were often hungry. On Victoria's 17th birthday, her German cousin, Prince Albert, came to visit her. Victoria liked him immediately. Her mother thought Prince Albert was the ideal husband, and Victoria agreed. At 5 in the morning, on the 20th of June, 1837, Victoria received the news. King William IV died that night, and she was now the Queen. She was only 18 and knew very little about government or politics. At 11:30 that morning, she went to meet her advisers, the Privy Councillors. She spoke and behaved calmly, and everyone admired her. The young Queen now lived at Buckingham Palace, away from the strict control of her mother. Victoria enjoyed going to the opera and the ballet, and began horse riding. Since she was short, she felt taller on a horse. Lord Melbourne, the Prime Minister, was the most important person in Victoria's early years as Queen. He was a kind and loyal friend. He gave her advice and helped her understand politics and government. In 1839, Victoria's cousin, Albert, visited her again. This is what she wrote in her diary. "Albert really is quite charming and so excessively handsome. My heart is quite going." Victoria loved Albert and proposed to him. Albert could not propose because he was of lower rank. They were married in 1840. Victoria and Albert loved each other very much. She called him an angel. However, Albert was a foreigner and not everyone liked him. Parliament did not give Albert a title, and many Londoners said rude things about him. Albert was intelligent, well-educated and responsible. He was very interested in science, music and the arts. Victoria learned from Albert to be a dedicated monarch, The Queen asked for his help on government affairs, and they always worked together. In November 1840, the Queen had her first child, Victoria. She was very clever and was the Queen's favourite child. In 1841, Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, was born. Between 1840 and 1857, Victoria and Albert had 9 children, 4 sons and 5 daughters. Victoria was a strict mother. The children's food and clothing were always very simple. Victoria and Albert were devoted parents and spent a lot of time with their children. Family values and morality were very important to the royal couple. They became an example for their people. Most Victorians had large families. In the late 1800s, the average family had 5 or 6 children. Albert introduced the first Christmas tree to the royal family, since it was a German custom. Soon it was popular all over Britain. Victoria was very fond of Christmas and its traditions. The first public railway opened in 1825 and attracted a lot of attention. It was built by George Stephenson, an engineer. In 1830, the Liverpool to Manchester Railway opened and soon transported 1,200 passengers every day. With the railway, people and goods travelled cheaply and quickly. Railways spread rapidly all over England, Scotland and Wales. People started going to the seaside and seaside towns developed. By 1848, there were no more stagecoaches. Almost everyone travelled by train. In 1842, Victoria and Albert took their first train ride. The Queen liked the speed, comfort and privacy of the train. Soon the royal family travelled by Royal Train, a specially designed carriage. In 1840, the first national postal system was created, and the penny black became the first adhesive postage stamp. Victoria's profile appeared on it. It cost only 1 penny to send a letter anywhere in Great Britain. Today, the red Victorian letterboxes are still used. Victoria had 3 royal houses, but she didn't like any of them. She wanted a private, remote family home. She and Albert bought a large estate called Osborne on the Isle of Wight. Victoria loved Osborne and was very happy there. In 1847, the royal couple bought a house in Scotland, Balmoral Castle. It was surrounded by green hills and forests. Victoria liked the fresh, clean air, and Albert liked hunting and fishing. Poverty was a big problem in 19th century Britain. Working people had a very difficult life. Adults and children worked long hours in factories in dangerous conditions. They were usually hungry and often ill. Squalid houses, unclean water and dirty streets caused many diseases. The air was full of smoke and fog. People did not live long in these conditions. People without work lived on the streets. They were beggars or thieves. Others lived in workhouses. Some Victorians tried to help the poor. Dr. Barnardo opened a home for orphans in London. Charles Dickens wrote about these social problems in his novels, for example in Oliver Twist and David Copperfield. Social reforms were seriously needed. In 1847, the 10-Hour Act limited the working day of women and children to 10 hours a day. In 1848, Parliament passed laws to make towns and cities cleaner, but progress was very slow. The middle and upper classes had clean, comfortable houses, far from the industrial centres, in green areas called suburbs. Their children received a good education. Under Victoria's reign, Britain became the richest commercial nation. It produced machines, textiles, ships, and other goods, and sold them to other countries. Albert wanted to show Britain's products, inventions, and machines to the world. He decided to open an international exhibition. For 2 years, he worked intensely on this complex project. The British began to appreciate Albert's qualities. On the 1st of May, 1851, Queen Victoria opened the Great Exhibition in the Crystal Palace in London. She called it the most beautiful spectacle ever seen. The Crystal Palace was truly a spectacle. It was made of iron and glass and was as big as 4 football fields. There were over 7,000 exhibitors from Britain and 6,000 from other countries. It was an enormous success, with over 6 million visitors in 140 days. During the 1850s, there were wars and revolts in Europe and Asia. British soldiers fought in several of them. The most important was the Crimean War on the Black Sea. Russia wanted to expand its empire and perhaps block the Mediterranean and overland routes to India. So, Britain and France decided to help Turkey fight Russia. The Crimean War was the first war that was photographed. For the first time, newspapers showed photographs of a war. A painful, tragic spectacle. Victoria was very unhappy because the soldiers suffered. She sent them mittens and scarves and visited the wounded soldiers in British hospitals. She wrote letters to the soldiers' widows. Albert wrote hundreds of letters to members of Parliament to ask them to send more help to the soldiers. Victoria helped Florence Nightingale, who went to Crimea with 38 nurses. She courageously set up a hospital for wounded soldiers and saved many lives. After the war, Florence Nightingale opened the first school for nurses in London. This was the beginning of modern nursing and improved hygienic conditions in hospitals. When the Crimean War ended in 1856, Victoria presented a special medal for courage to many soldiers. This medal was called the Victoria Cross, and it was made of captured Russian cannon. At this time, India was controlled by the British East India Company, a trading company set up in India. In 1857, there was a rebellion against the British who lived in India. It was called the Indian Mutiny. Thousands of people were killed. After this rebellion, India became part of the British Empire and was controlled by the British government. Victoria was very healthy and was rarely ill. She did not like hot rooms and always kept windows open, even in winter. Albert was usually cold and was not as healthy as Victoria. He worked too much and rarely rested. He was also worried about his son, the Prince of Wales. The prince's adventures with women and gambling shocked Albert, who was very upright. Albert became very tired and weak. In November 1861, he caught typhoid fever, but he continued working until he died on the 14th of December. Victoria was devastated. It was the greatest agony of her life. She was lost without Albert. She was convinced that her son, the Prince of Wales, was responsible for Albert's death. She did not permit the Prince of Wales to help her with government work. Victoria visited Albert's impressive tomb at Frogmore near Windsor regularly. She wanted everyone to remember him. the Albert Memorial and the Royal Albert Hall near the Kensington Gardens in London were built to honour her beloved husband. In her sadness and misery, Victoria became a recluse. For 13 years, she refused to appear in public and go to Privy Council meetings. However, she continued studying government papers privately and never lost contact with her kingdom. She spent a lot of time at Balmoral Castle, far from London. A Scottish servant called John Brown became her loyal friend. During this period, Victoria and the monarchy became very unpopular, and some politicians wanted to abolish it and create a republic. In 1866, Victoria opened Parliament for the first time after Albert's death. She was dressed in black, the colour of mourning, which she wore for the rest of her life. Transportation became a big problem in London because roads were always crowded. In 1863, the first underground railway in the world opened in London. Today, it is called the Tube. This was a period of social reforms. In 1870, the Education Act was passed. It introduced the first state schools for all children between the ages of 5 and 13. Factory reforms, new laws for the poor, and new hospitals improved people's lives. In 1875, many slums were destroyed and better homes were built. However, poverty was still a big problem. In 1878, the American inventor, Alexander Bell, showed the Queen his invention, the telephone. Victoria was astonished. She was even more astonished to learn about the invention of a new means of transport, the automobile. This was a period of revolutionary change. At this time, Victoria's favourite Prime Minister was Benjamin Disraeli, a witty, intelligent man. He got along well with the Queen and encouraged her to return to public life. Disraeli wanted to expand the British Empire. His political rival, William Gladstone, wanted to limit it. Victoria did not like Gladstone. He complained about the cost of the Albert Memorial. Victoria liked Disraeli's idea of a bigger and stronger British Empire. In 1869, the Suez Canal, built by the French, opened and created an important trade route to India and the East. Great Britain bought shares in the canal to secure Britain's power in the East. India was an important colony with its production of tea, silk and cotton. Victoria was fascinated by India and was delighted to become Empress of India in 1876. The British Empire expanded rapidly with the addition of Borneo, Burma and New Guinea. David Livingstone was a British missionary and a great explorer. In the 1850s, he travelled extensively in Africa and made the first maps of Central Africa. He discovered 6 lakes, rivers, mountains and the biggest waterfall in the world, called Victoria Falls, in honour of the Queen. Henry Morton Stanley explored Lake Tanganyika and the Congo River. In the 1880s, Britain took control of large parts of Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya and Uganda. In 1883, there was a war in Sudan and rebels destroyed the British command in Khartoum. From its African colonies, Britain got cocoa, coffee and diamonds. On the 20th of June 1887, Victoria celebrated her 50 years as Queen. The following day, she rode through London in an open carriage for the spectacular Golden Jubilee celebrations. The streets were full of cheering people. A procession of royal guests from all over the world rode in front of Victoria. There were kings and queens from Europe, the Crown Prince of Prussia, and princes from India, Japan, and Siam. Victoria was very fond of music and liked singing arias from the comic operas of Gilbert and Sullivan. The Mikado, The Pirates of Penzance, and HMS Pinafore are their most famous operas. However, it was the famous British composer Edward Elgar who wrote music for the great celebration. But Victoria felt sad and lonely. "I sat alone," she wrote. "Oh, without my beloved husband." All of her children married into royal families in different parts of Europe. When Victoria celebrated her Diamond Jubilee in 1897, there was another gigantic procession with 50,000 troops from all over the British Empire. On that day, Victoria pressed a button to send a telegraph message around the empire. "From my heart I thank my beloved people. May God bless them." In 1899, the British Empire was the biggest empire in the world. It covered 1/5 of the Earth's land area with 370 million people. Victoria was now an old woman and suffered from rheumatism. She could not walk well, but was still active. She worked from 7:30 in the morning until late at night, studying government papers. She loved her people and her empire. At the beginning of 1901, the Queen was very weak. On the 22nd of January, 1901, Victoria died at the age of 82 at Osborne House. Thousands of people wept during her funeral procession. She was considered the mother of the British Empire. She was buried beside her beloved Albert at Frogmore, near Windsor.